Hello and welcome to Charting the Course, the insider's guide to the life and challenges of a medical student transitioning to residency. I'm Alyssa, your host and fellow journeyer on this path of medicine. As a fourth-year medical student, I'm right in the thick of it, just like many of you. Each episode will dive into the real, the raw, and the rewarding aspects of this journey. From virtual interviews to our first days as residents, we'll explore what it means to pursue a career in medicine. So grab your stethoscopes, a cup of coffee, and join me as we navigate this exciting, challenging, and life-changing world together. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode. Today I want to talk about my approach to answering UWorld and NBME questions. I want to discuss exactly how I go about answering a question and a question stem. And I also want to talk about generally what I would do as far as reading everything and as far as taking any notes afterwards if I got a question correct versus incorrect on the first or second pass. So let's go ahead and just get started. So what I did as far as my approach to questions is I started towards kind of the end. I started doing this thing where I would read the question at the very end of the paragraph, and then after that I would go up and read the question stem, and then based on all of that, I would come up with my own answers before actually looking at the answer choices. I noticed during my dedicated studying that I was kind of hanging on to answers that I had seen previously. So if I glanced ahead at the answers, I would be more likely to kind of hang on to one or two of them without even reading the question, and then I would end up getting questions wrong more often. So I started just doing this where I'd come up with my own answers, or at least come up with my own diagnosis in my head after reading the question stem. And I noticed that I started getting a lot more questions right when I started answering questions this way. And it actually forced me to really pay attention to the question and the whole description of the patient because I didn't have preformed answers already ready. So that is kind of my approach to answering the questions. And as far as if I get the question correct or incorrect, basically what I would do was the same for every question every single time. I would read the summary and I would read all of the options, why they were incorrect and why the correct answer was correct. That way I felt like I was getting a refresher on different concepts, and, I just found that to be helpful. I didn't do that perfectly 100% of the time, but I'd say at least 95% of the time I was reading all of the answers. And then if I got an answer incorrect, I would do the same thing. I would read everything and all of the incorrect answers that were, distractors, blah, blah, blah. I would do the same thing for both cases. And then during dedicated, what I did a little bit differently is on my second pass through my UWorld incorrects, I would write down if I got a question wrong for the second time. So I would kind of figure out, the question that I got wrong, and I would kind of lay out everything in terms of clinical features, diagnosis, how you treat it, any common comorbidities or complications of this disease. And I would do that for every single one of the questions that I would get wrong twice. And that way I was just kind of mentally saying, okay, I tend to get this wrong a lot. Let's make sure I get this straight. And then I read that through that whole document, which I ended up making probably 100 pages of things that I just kept getting wrong. And I read through all of that prior to taking step 2. So I was refreshing myself on all of my weaknesses right before taking the exam. I also another thing that I did with that is I would lay out things together that I commonly got incorrect. For instance, transfusion related acute lung injury, or TRALI, and then transfusion associated circulatory overload, oh my gosh. Anyway, or TACO, or I call it TACO. I don't know if it's actually called TACO. Anyway, I would get those mixed up. So what I did is I put them on the same page, wrote it all out the old-fashioned style, and then that way I could compare the two just visually. And that way I'm just kind of keeping everything straight, and understanding the things that I commonly got wrong. Same with like transfusion reactions. I noticed that I was commonly getting those wrong and mixed up with one another. So that's kind of how I approached once I got something incorrect for the second time. But the first time through getting something incorrect, I used it as a learning opportunity, and I just didn't want to get too hung up on writing everything down if I got something wrong. I considered my first pass through things just to be a learning moment. And then after that, let's dial things in a little bit more. And I guess one thing that I didn't really discuss is flagging questions. So in UWorld, you can flag questions. I can't remember. I think you can do this in the NBMEs too. Gosh, I feel like I have dementia at this point. I think you can do it in the NBMEs, but it doesn't last afterwards. You can only flag it to come back for it later. But after you already finished the practice test, I don't think you can go back and see what you flagged and what you didn't flag. Anyway, with UWorld, you can do that. It basically puts all of these questions in their own category. So for a question that I got correct only because I guessed it correct, I flagged it because I wanted to make sure that I would come back and do those questions prior to taking the real thing again. Just like I wanted to go through my incorrects again, I considered guessing a question correct. I guess I considered that technically incorrect, so I flagged those. So then when I was going through my incorrects prior to taking step 2, I was going through I selected to take my incorrects and my flagged questions. That way I was seeing them all again. Anyway, I hope this is helpful. This is what I did for studying for step 2. And yeah, I hope it can be helpful for you guys. Let me know if you have any questions. And we'll see you in the next episode.